I think this is likely to be our most conspiratorial discussion on the YouTube podcast, but I do think there's a lot of value in it for homeowners in the San Diego area who are going to be considering a project down the line. I think this is something you're definitely going to want to understand and be aware of. So, to kick things off, Sean, why don't you just explain to everyone, establish an understanding of what exactly this EMRA or EMRA is?
Okay. Good morning, Billy. Um, we're actually approaching a heat wave here in San Diego, so I think this episode may put the building department in the hot seat. So I think it's kind of appropriate. What I'm going to explain to you today is an ongoing dispute I've been having with the building department, which has lasted 2 to 3 years. But ultimately, we've now hit a sticking point with some of my new projects. And this is all related to an EMRA requirement, which is an encroachment and removal agreement, also referred to as an EMRA. And this is going to get a little technical, so I apologize up front, but I'm going to try to walk you through it step by step. But it also speaks to the general nature of what it takes to get a building permit and what the building department does in terms of increasing regulation and red tape, ultimately increasing costs for the typical homeowner in the city of San Diego. Sometimes people ask me, well, why is it so expensive to build things? Well, a lot of those costs come from the building permit and the regulation that revolves around the building permits. And let's keep in mind, ultimately, the purpose of the building permit, as stated in the Municipal Code and in the California Building Code, to increase safety. That's the goal of the permit. Okay, so let me walk you through this, Billy. Let's say you're a homeowner. You're considering a kitchen remodel. It's a fairly simple project. So you call me up as an architect and you ask me, should I get a permit for this? Well, my professional opinion is yes, you generally should get a permit. It's certainly required for a kitchen remodel, especially if you're moving a sink or an appliance or redoing electrical work. Now, whatever your kitchen remodel costs, at the end of the day, if you achieve a permit for this, you could be increasing your monthly payments by $100 a month on your homeowner's insurance policy. So think about that. That's $1,200 a year for the lifespan, of the home, and then you pass that cost on to the future homeowner. Probably disproportionately affects lower income or medium income people in San Diego more than higher income people. It applies to everybody getting a building permit, and that's the significance of this. Let me share my screen here, and I want to show you where the situation starts to come into play. Okay.
One quick point of clarification, is it in San Diego or California as a whole? Are you required to have homeowners insurance? Because I know in some states, like Florida, for example, I know it can be very hard to get a policy. And then I imagine some states don't require it.
Okay, so that's a little bit of an overarching issue. I do believe you need a homeowner's insurance policy if you have a mortgage on your home. At least that's my understanding. It's not my expertise. We also have this ongoing thing where it's difficult to get homeowners insurance if you live in a very high fire severity zone, which quite a lot of the city of San Diego does. So this also could affect your ability to maintain an existing homeowners insurance policy. This is a street in La Jolla, typical street in La Jolla. I just randomly selected one. Take a look at this brick wall here. Take a look at this retaining wall, these stairs here, this retaining wall here, this tree here, this fence over here. I can basically go down any block in the city of San Diego and find things that would be considered encroachments into the right of way. The reason for that is while most people assume that their front property line is where the sidewalk ends, in probably about 98% of the scenarios, your front property line is usually a few feet back, sometimes about 4 feet back. That tends to be the standard. So this is where the front property line is, which means everything you need to do to your property, which is on your ownership side of the front property line, you would get a building permit. And everything that you would do on the city's side of the property, you would get a right-of-way permit. Okay, so now what is happening is the city over the last 2 or 3 years has been asking for these EMRAs when you pull building permits. So what that document would state would be if anybody was to trip and fall in this area, you as the homeowner would be liable for that, which I think is the standard way, most municipalities handle these things. So I don't think there's anything surprising with that. What the document also states is if the city notifies you, you'd have 30 days to remove all of this, which, may be a little overreach. But the thing that I'm really upset about this document is the insurance policy that the city requires you to take indemnifying the city of San Diego. And this is a $500,000 insurance policy for single family homes and $1 million insurance policy for multifamily homes. And I did some research on this, and it seems like the costs per year could be between $700 and $1,700 per year. So that's where I got that initial figure of $100 a month. This is an ongoing payment that you're going to pay for the life of the home. So here, let's just go down the street here and talk about which properties have encroachments that would be subject to this agreement. This block wall would be over the property line. This landscaping is over the property line, so they would ask one here. Over here, we have landscaping in the public right-of-way, and we have a palm tree over here, so that property would be subject to it. Here you have stairs that encroach into the public right-of-way and landscaping, so that property would be subject to it. Here you have a small retaining wall. This one may actually be on the other side of the property, but if this landscaping grows over 18 inches, then that would be subject to the EMRA document. These are all built in the public right-of-way. Chain link fence over here. We have a tree that would require an EMRA. This one looks like it was actually built properly, but these pavers and this stone doesn't meet the city standard, so that requires an EMRA. Palm trees here require an EMRA. Everything that's in this area here, all of that requires an EMRA. So if you really get down to it, you could basically walk down any street in the city of San Diego and find a property that doesn't conform the current code. In fact, check this out. Right here, San Diego Municipal Code 540110, unauthorized encroachments prohibited. And you can see it's unlawful for any person to erect, place, allow, to remain, construct, establish, plant, or maintain any vegetation or object in the public street, alley, sidewalk, or highway. So, you could interpret this as all of this grass right here is a code violation. So the code is so big that there's so many pieces to this thing, and I don't really think that anybody at the building department is really fully understanding what's going on here. Okay, so does that set the stage here?
I think it does. Why don't you just summarize, though, at a high level for people what the issue is as succinctly as you can?
Okay, so this is the document that is required. And the question that I have is what triggers this requirement? First, let's go over some brief things about this document. Here it states that the agreement shall run with the land. This means if you sell the property, the new owner has to agree to this agreement. This could potentially hinder the sale of your property. You can read through this document. It's just called the San Diego Development Services Department Encroachment Maintenance and Removal Agreement. It's pretty overreaching in my opinion. In fact, here's where this is in the municipal code. And I'm going to get into the technicality of this in a little bit. So there's our EMRA. And you can look here where we talk about a $1 million liability insurance, and that's going to apply to multifamily properties. And then here we have $500,000 limit of liability insurance for single family dwelling units. And that's where the ongoing cost occurs. So the issue, and by the way, I should also mention, this is the building department building. This is the development services building. And I can just use the municipal code and I can determine that they're actually out of compliance with their own code. So the city should also sign an EMRA, but all of this stuff does not meet the building code. So it's a little hypocritical to say the least. Okay, so this is the encroachment, maintenance, and removal agreement that the city of San Diego asks for. And here you can see it states that the agreement shall run with the land. So this means not only is it going to last the lifetime of your ownership, but it's going to transfer to the next owner of the property, which could also hinder the sale of a property. And then over here, we have the code section, Maintenance and Removal Agreements 129.0715. And here's where it kind of steps over the line, in my opinion. They're asking for the $1 million liability insurance for multifamily projects and a $500,000 liability insurance for single dwelling units. And that's where that ongoing monthly payment comes from. So not only would the homeowner be increasing their liability beyond what is already there, but they're also increasing their monthly payments. So there's a couple reasons why I think this is a major issue. Okay, so now I think we can dive into some of the specifics here And I just have some notes on the side I want to pull up here. Hold on one second. So are you following me so far, Billy?
I am, but could you clarify? I know this might be a bit of a distinction without a difference, but is the issue that the city is over interpreting the code or that they're applying it where it shouldn't be applied?
So my issue is they're applying it to a building permit when it appears like it would only apply to a right-of-way permit. A right-of-way permit is when you pull a permit to replace your sidewalk or to build some stairs in the right-of-way, so things that are off of your property. A building permit is when you get permission to do stuff within your property. And that's really the crux of the argument. It's when is this triggered? When does the homeowner be responsible to sign this document? And it's important that the code is interpreted correctly because the code is dictated by city council. City council approves these codes, and then as the architect, we have to follow the code. And then the building department reviews the plans for the minimum standard of the code. So let me explain this a little bit more. If I go over here, this is the entire municipal code by chapter. And if I come over here to chapter 12, and if I click on this, this will open up land development reviews. And in this code section here, in this chapter, we have all different types of permits. Down here, we have chapter 12, article 9, division 2, building permit procedures. And over here, chapter 12, article 9, division 7, we have public right-of-way permits. So first, let's figure out where the EMRA section lives. So here's our public right-of-way permit procedures section. And if I scroll down here, we can find the EMRA requirement. Now, if I go up to the top here, the first section of the code states that the purpose of these procedures, which are the procedures in this exact code section, are to establish the process for review of public right-of-way permits. And if I go to the building permit section here, you can see the purpose of this chapter is to establish the process for review of building permit applications. And to apply this code section to something over here is just categorically the wrong way to read the code. In fact, when I look up the building permit procedures, we have the purpose of building permit procedures, when a building permit is required, and exceptions from a building permit. And if I go down here to public right-of-way permits, we have the purpose for the public right-of-way permits, when the public right-of-way permit is required, and exceptions. And if I go back here, I can look at all these other permits. We have fire permit, sign permit, grading permit, demo permit, plumbing and mechanical permit, electrical permit, and they all have the exact same formatting. And if I go up here, we have some of the more difficult permits to achieve. We have our development permit, our neighborhood use permit, conditional permit, et cetera, until we get to our coastal development permit procedure. So this has been my argument with the building department. It's that we need to understand when the EMRA is triggered. And if you're going to say, which is what they're saying, that they can select the EMRA for a public right-of-way permit that we're not applying for, that means you have to ignore this whole section of the code. So the building department is ignoring a section of the code to apply these EMRA requirements to projects that only require building permits. Now, I guess I should also take a step back and explain what type of project requires a building permit and what type of project requires a right-of-way permit, because maybe that's the context that I've left out here. So basically the threshold would be medium level projects are going to require the right-of-way permit that's here, and then you're going to trigger the EMRA based on the code, which has been approved by City Council. So if you're doing a kitchen renovation, like I mentioned earlier, you're going to get a building permit, but you wouldn't be required to get a right-of-way permit unless you're upgrading the water meter, which would be, pretty rare to do. The building permit at the lower end would be required if you're moving a single electrical outlet 1 foot over on the wall. That requires a building permit. A kitchen renovation would require a building permit. A full interior renovation of a home would require a building permit. A small addition would require a building permit. A large addition would require a building permit. Now, if you get to the level where you're doing like 4 units on one property, maybe that's ADUs, a dwelling unit, or 2 dwelling units and 2 ADUs, typically is going to trigger a water meter upgrade, which you need the public right-of-way permit to do, and then you're going to be subject to the EMRA based on this code section. So basically, We're talking about here is smaller projects, generally under 3 or 4 units. And projects 4 to 5 units and above are going to trigger the public right of way permit. So you're going to need the EMRA. So I guess what I'm trying to defend here is the smaller projects and trying to ensure that regulation remains at a reasonable level for these types of projects. Sometimes you don't have a huge budget like you do on a larger project. I guess the other thing I should mention is, these codes apply to everybody in the city of San Diego, whether you're in La Jolla, or whether you're in Logan Heights. And that was kind of the point of those street view images. Okay, so point number one, if a public right of way permit is triggered by a building permit, then you have to ignore this code section. And the building department is not allowed to ignore code sections. Point number two, if the building department can say that a section of the public right of way permit can be cherry picked and applied to a project where only a building permit is being issued, well, that sets a precedent where they can take sections from any of these permits and apply them to any other section. And, the disaster that this would create would be people can take code sections from the coastal development permit procedures and apply them to your building permit procedure section. Do you understand the precedent that that establishes?
Yeah.
Okay, the other thing that this creates as an issue is me as an architect, when I start a project, I'm advising my client what is going to happen when they do this project. So I'm looking at the project at the beginning and I'm saying, hey, you're going to need this permit. Hey, you're going to incur these expenses, whether it's for construction or other things that have to occur. But because they've hid the EMRA section, and I say hid the EMRA section, but that's just because of the way they're interpreting it. I think it's actually very intentional that the EMRA section is in the public right-of-way permit section because that's what city council wants. You do the work in the public right-of-way, you sign the EMRA. I think I shouldn't have said hidden. But because it's here instead of in this code section, there's no way for an architect or a homeowner to understand that by the time they get to permit issuance, they're going to need an EMRA. And by the time they're in that deep, they've invested in the architect, the engineering, the Title 24 report. They've probably had contractors come out and bid their project, and they've paid their initial permit fees. So they're tens of thousands of dollars deep. They figure out that they need to sign this EMRA document. What this actually does is it creates an obstruction to a permit. If a client comes to me, like you in this example, where you're saying, hey, I want to do this kitchen remodel, and I want to make sure I go through the proper procedure. I want to get the permit. I want to get the building department out here to inspect the work to make sure it's all safe, which is the purpose of the permit. If I tell you up front, well, Bailey, when you do this, you're actually going to have to increase your homeowner's insurance policy by $100 a month. Now, don't you think maybe you consider this and you say, well, maybe I shouldn't get the permit? Isn't there that thought process?
That was something that ran through my mind before you even asked me the question of what if he just didn't do it in the first place. But I also think, for example, in the kitchen renovation project, essentially on top of the upfront costs, then it's like you have the project on like $100 a month or so subscription for the rest of your life, which I don't think anyone wants to do. Plus, I would imagine over time, it's $100 today, perhaps. Hope I could definitely see that increasing.
Yeah, you're 100% right. The insurance cost will increase, and it has increased historically in California. So what this actually does is it creates an obstruction from people doing the right thing. It creates a penalty for the person who pulls the permit because we can see two projects that are out of conformance. This guy pulls the permit. Now he signs the EMRA. This guy has a similar encroachment, but he doesn't pull the permit, so he doesn't have to sign the document. This is pervasive in the city of San Diego, and this is how the building department is run. They continue to escalate these types of obstructions to a building permit without consideration of what this does to a project. It speaks to the greater obstructions that we're encountering and why costs continue to climb.
The one thing that stands out to me as I was watching the screen share is that I believe that specifically the ADU type projects, the code is supposed to be formatted in a way where you don't necessarily need to be an architect with this in-depth understanding to be able to go through, understand the regulations that would affect your project. But just going through that, honestly, it kind of gives me a headache. I'm not gonna lie, it's just very technical. Fortunately, today, I mean, I think people what they should do is download the documents, upload them to ChatGPT, and then it could summarize it give them a solid overview. Although, of course, you got to double check all that. But that's the one thing that kind of really stands out to me. I guess taking a step back, though, we've talked about how this affects, individual properties and individual project types. But on a macro level, how would you see this affecting the entire city of San Diego when it comes to development, housing, things of that nature?
Okay, well, the question I continue to ask the building department is what triggers this? Because if I read the code, I see a public right of way triggers this. But what they're telling me is a building permit triggers this. But there's all different types of building permits, like I mentioned. You have the building permit for the addition, you have a all the way down to a no plan permit, which doesn't require plans, and you submit the no plan permit, which is just a document. Then you can move an electrical outlet. So for simple projects, you have the no plan permit. Now, because the building department cannot answer what triggers this, the assumption is that all building permits trigger this. This means people who have smaller projects, if they understand upfront about this EMRA, they're going to avoid getting the permit. And that does the exact opposite of what a permit is supposed to do. People who do not understand upfront that they're going to need to sign this EMRA, they're going to be burdened by an additional cost throughout the life of their home. In a time when, we're at an all-time high in cost. Construction's up, materials are up, permit fees increased 5 times last year, in addition to them changing out the categories, making them all more expensive. This increases cost across the board, and it also increases obstruction for people getting permits. And by the way, this also increases time because to get the EMRA document properly accomplished, it takes like 3 to 4 weeks. So it also increases permitting time. And, there's one more point I do want to make here. This is a lot of these encroachments would be considered pre-conforming conditions. The municipal code is a moving target. It always changes. In the past, people would build a home maybe 10 feet from the property line, and you could have had a 10-foot setback. But now the building department may say, hey, you know what? We actually think 15-foot setbacks are better. Now that home is considered a previously conforming condition. You don't have to demolish the front of the home and it back because the building department changes the standard. It's considered a previously conforming condition. This EMRA code section was established in 2006. So most of these encroachments occurred before 2006. What they're doing is they're completely ignoring the fact that these encroachments were there before the code section was written. They should really all be considered previously conforming conditions in most cases. And you can go back on Google Earth Street View and you can get back to 2006 or 2007 and basically verify that these things were built before the code was in place.
Yeah, so I guess to wrap up this section here, why do you think the building department is doing this? Would you attribute it to incompetence or malicious intent, maybe a combination of both?
Okay, so we've asked this question to the building department and we've gotten lots of different answers. They just basically continue to move the goalposts on us. I started fighting the building department on this about 2 to 3 years ago, like I mentioned. And at that time, I said, where does this come from? My response to the building department is always, show me the code and we're happy to comply if the code applies to the project. And what they said was the city attorney issued a memo requiring the engineering department to request these EMRAs. And I said, well, send the memo over. Let me take a look, make sure it applies to my project. And they said, well, we can't share the memo. But that doesn't make sense because we need to understand what is being applied to the project. And if you can't send it, it's just an invisible document or a made up document that I can't design to. If you say, hey, I have a code, but I can't share it with you, well, how can I make the project meet your code requirements? And
Yeah, this is where the conspiratorial element comes in with this hidden document that can't be unsealed.
yeah, now it doesn't surprise me that the building department wants homeowners to be liable for things that happen in the public right of way. And to some extent, I guess I would agree with that. It's really the requirements, the nuanced requirements of the document that I have the issue with. So the first thing was, hey, the city attorney requires this. But we don't design based on internal memos that the city attorney requires. We design based on the code. So if the city attorney has an issue, they go to city council and they modify the code. And that's the proper procedure. Now, where we're at with the municipal code and the building code in general in 2025 is the code never gets smaller. The code continues to grow. And the code is like you can look at any section of the code and it has all these branches that extend out to other sections of the code. So the more we add to the code, the more of this like crazy Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Charlie meme you start to get, where they're pointing all over the place. There's nobody at the building department that has a comprehensive understanding of all of these branches of the code and how they apply to a real world project. It's too dense. I would challenge anybody at the building department to create a flow sheet which explains all of the permits and all of the ways these apply to the standard homeowner, from the small project of a kitchen remodel to the large project of a high rise. So it's become so dense that it's just impossible for people to understand. And then when you bring up an issue like this, instead of the building department saying, you know what, I understand what you're saying, this shouldn't affect the homeowner, you're met with a defensive position where they're like, oh, well, that's what the code says. And when I ask, show me a code section, they show me the code section. And I said, but this code doesn't apply. Look at what it says here. They just say, well, that's how we're going to apply it. So it's like, just like skirt their own regulations when they want to. And in other scenarios, they say, well, that's not the intent of the code, even though that's what is written in the code. It's become very pervasive in the city of San Diego, and it's disappointing because it doesn't increase safety. It doesn't help the homeowner. There are some other things that have been told to us when I question this EMRA. And by the way, I've been able to get these cleared on every project for 3 years until about 3 months ago, when they just put their feet in the sand and they said, this one we're going to keep. So I don't know why there's an additional regulation, they're like a stick in the mud right now on these new ones. So other things that have been told to us is the EMRA is beneficial to the homeowner. And I asked the supervisor, I said, okay, well, if you think an EMRA is beneficial to the homeowner, have you voluntarily signed one for your own home? And he said, no, I haven't. I said, okay, well, then I don't think you believe that it's beneficial to the homeowner. We've also heard that, people in La Jolla can pay for this. They have money, so they can pay for it. And we get this a lot from the top level of the supervisors at the Development Services Department. I don't want to name any names, but when we complain about code sections, the answer is these people have money, they can pay for it. What they don't understand is the people that have money have attorneys, number one, and the people who don't have money have to meet the same code. It's a universal code. It applies to the whole city. We've also heard other people are signing this. Why won't you sign it? And my argument is, well, those people don't know what they're signing, or they're not reading the code. So I don't believe that is a fair argument. So these are kind of the things that are happening with my discussions with the building department.
Yeah, and I think you'd be okay with this, but I think open invite if anyone from the building department would ever like to come on to the YouTube show here to discuss the regulations more in depth. Because I would say you have a very fair perspective, although I am biased, but I would say you've got a fair perspective and you would be open-minded to a reasonable discussion on the
I
matter.
would be more than happy to have a discussion on this with the building department.
So going forward, I mean, how are you advising your current clients, prospective clients who are considering a project? How are you advising them to go about thinking about this potential roadblock down the line?
Yeah, so I'm attacking this from basically every angle at this point because this will apply to every single project I work on. We've reached out to the mayor to discuss this. We've reached out to a couple attorneys to get their opinion on this, other architects and colleagues of mine, and to get their opinion on this. On one hand, exploring other options to get other opinions on how to handle this. For my clients, it seems like, we're getting to the end of the permit. This is the last comment, and we can't issue the permit until this is signed. The building department is just stonewalling us without citing specific codes. They're just saying, sorry, that's what it is, even though I say, hey, but look, this code section applies and you're ignoring this. So they won't allow permits to be issued until this document is signed. So what I have to advise my client is to consult an attorney and ultimately probably have to sign the form under duress, which basically opens the door for them to then fight this legally later on. So that's pretty frustrating. What I think most people are probably doing is signing the form and not getting the insurance policy. I think that's what the majority of people are doing.
I mean, that is one strategy for sure. Not sure I would recommend it though, quite honestly, as annoying as it might be.
Yeah.
But I think we've covered everything. I think this is a very fantastic example, quite frankly, of independent citizen journalism. Because if you had not gone on and done all the research, I feel like most people wouldn't even know.
It's something that until you're ready to issue your permit, and then you have to do kind of a deep dive because when we first asked the question, we got a million different answers. And every time they would give us an answer. I'd say, no, that's not legally how this works. And then they'd give us a different answer. And they said, that doesn't make sense either. Then they give us a different answer. So they keep moving the goalposts until finally I got them to say, this is the exact code section. And then when I say, well, that code doesn't apply, just say, sorry, we're applying the code. So that's as far as I can take it as an architect. Did I do a good job of explaining this and how this affects everybody, especially the smaller homeowner trying to do the right thing and go buy the book?
Yeah, I think so. The discussion was more entertaining and interesting than I thought it would be at the start. Let's put it that way. So I do think you did a very good job.
What would you remodel in this scenario?
Oh, well, definitely if I had a small project, like an internal type project. I mean, I don't live in California, so I don't think this would be a problem for me to say that I would not consult the building department. Which is interesting because I was thinking of like where we're from, New Jersey. I don't recall anyone ever talking about getting a permit for like a kitchen remodel or bathroom remodel, these types of things. So I don't know. Maybe that's like a suburban thing. I don't know. What do you think about that? Because it seems like I've never heard of anyone needing to get a permit for that type of a project.
California has the highest level of code regulation in any state that I'm aware of. And we also have the worst housing crisis in any state in the United States. And I think there's a direct correlation between the two of them. So we have so much regulation, and since the regulation, the purpose of this is for safety, we should be far more safe than every other state. But in fact, after these wildfires that have made national news, probably are not even close to the safest state. The only conclusion you can draw is that this type of regulation amplifies housing crisis while having a diminishing return in terms of the purpose of the code, which is public safety.
Totally. I think that's a good place to leave it for today, unless there's anything else you want to add. Otherwise, how can people get in touch with the architecture studio? Say they're even self-financing their own project, they're handling the construction,
Mhm.
maybe they're handy. How still could you help out with that?
Well, send me an email, Sean, SEAN, at 1070architecture.com. We're happy to help, depending if it's a smaller project, it may not be a good fit for us. We specialize in missing middle housing, everything from home renovations all the way up to multifamily projects. We're probably one of the leading experts in the ADU regulations, which there's a lot of hidden codes in the ADU regulations, which we can talk about on a whole nother podcast. And what I'm really most interested in is people's opinions on this EMRA document. So if you're a professional or a homeowner, or if you work for the building department, drop a comment in here and let's have an open discussion about what you think. Do you think these have a significant impact on your project? Or do you think it's not a big deal to sign this document and carry this cost for the lifespan of the home? 1070 Architecture also offers consulting service. So if you're at the end of your permitting or somewhere in your permitting and you need an expert to take a look at where you're at and advise you properly, we can offer you an hourly rate to do that. If you're also mid-design or considering a design and you need advice from a licensed architect who has 15 years of experience in the city of San Diego, we offer hourly rates to do that. So either way, we can help you out. All you got to do is reach out to me.
Yeah, so links in the description for everything I mentioned, as well as Sean's email. Otherwise, thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Make sure to like the video, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.